Serious, forensic investigators of Reddit _ what are some of the most disturbing? Worked a case involving two young sisters, 8 and 4 if I recall. This was 20 years ago, and their meth head mom and her boyfriend. Mom was convinced her girls were possessed by demons, so she forced them to take baths in bleach. When that didn't work, she started making them drink bleach. The older girl knew enough to immediately throw up the bleach, and she would drag her sister behind the couches or wherever they could in the house to throw it up. Eventually the little daughter couldn't throw it up anymore and died. She then froze the little sister, and proceeded to hack the frozen body into pieces in front of the older sister, and then disposed of the pieces somehow. We were sent in to see if we could find the body. Walking into that house, the smell of bleach was overwhelming, and I can still remember all the bleach stains on the carpet. Had a paranoid schizophrenic male who forced his elderly mother to eat rocks, and I mean a shitload of rocks, to the point where she died. He told police that he was feeding her rocks to weigh her down so God couldn't take her yet. Former EMT here. Drunk mom doesn't put her 1-year-old in a car seat. Proceeds to hit a huge, very solid oak tree. Baby was ejected from the car. Through the windshield, glancing blow off the tree trunk, slams into jagged boulder and smaller rock formation. Not enough left to do any treatment on. Mom barely has a bloody nose, and a bruised leg. There are others, but this one is the worst. Okay, this dates back many years to my time as a U.S. Army said criminal investigator. I was working a fraud case against a soldier, whom I'll call Sturgis, who had been collecting housing allowance, but actually living in his car. Total was about $11,000, so it's not like he was looking at prison time or anything. Worst case scenario was a dishonorable discharge. But his company XO made a hobby out of making this guy's life miserable while the investigation was going on. He personally escorted the guy to all his meetings with me, the JAG office, and other than that he was basically on full lockdown. One day they had an extended field exercise, still on base, but sleeping in tents for a few days and doing, I dunno, infantry stuff. When they got back to the company grounds, everyone lined up at the arms room turn in their M16s and other various weaponry, but Sturgis instead walked out into the middle of the parade ground and sat down. The XO came out after him, yelling all the way about what a world of shit he was going to rain down on him. Sturgis stood up and shot him full auto with ammo he'd pocketed from the range. Stitched him from groin to neck. Then Sturgis sat back down and put the muzzle to his eye socket and held the trigger down for as long as he could. Once the duty agent who got the call put together who the cast of characters was, he called me since I had the existing case file. When I got there the XO's body was gone. They'd taken him to the ER but DOA. Sturgis they didn't bother with since his head looked like a deflated basketball. Turned out that the bullet from his rifle went right through his brain and shattered the top of his skull, and the muzzle gas pushed his brain completely out of his skull. One perfect hemisphere was laying next to him, the other a surprisingly long distance away and had landed in an anthill and was crawling with ants. I used a tongue depressor to roll the loose parts of Sturgis into a plastic bag. His autopsy was the next day, and I attended to take photographs, for the file, not a personal thing. That was almost 30 years ago, and I can still hear the medical examiner say "Uck, there's fucking ants all over this thing." Like sorry dude, was that the thing that made this job too real for you? The XO came out after him, yelling all the way about what a world of shit he was going to rain down on him. Sturgis stood up and shot him full auto with ammo he'd pocketed from the range. Stitched him from groin to neck. Then Sturgis sat back down and put the muzzle to his eye socket and held the trigger down for as long as he could. Once the duty agent who got the call put together who the cast of characters was, he called me since I had the existing case file. When I got there the XO's body was gone. They'd taken him to the ER but DOA. Sturgis they didn't bother with since his head looked like a deflated basketball. Turned out that the bullet from his rifle went right through his brain and shattered the top of his skull, and the muzzle gas pushed his brain completely out of his skull. One perfect hemisphere was laying next to him, the other a surprisingly long distance away and had landed in an anthill and was crawling with ants. I used a tongue depressor to roll the loose parts of Sturgis into a plastic bag. His autopsy was the next day, and I attended to take photographs, for the file, not a personal thing. That was almost 30 years ago, and I can still hear the medical examiner say "Uck, there's fucking ants all over this thing." Like sorry dude, was that the thing that made this job too real for you? So with plan in hand, they get to the house. Jane Doe and the lady run up and start banging on the door. screaming bloody murder about someone bring after them. Inside are two of the gang's girlfriends/wives. They figure something is up. One gets a shotgun, one gets on the phone and dials 911. The women outside are banging so hard on the door it begins to break and come apart. Lady with the shotgun is scared and has it pointed at the door. The door breaks open and Jane Doe is the first through the door. Shotgun lady lets both barrels rip and deletes Jane Doe's face from eyebrows to chin. This was back in the 90s. I wonder if they ever figured out who she was. Edit, fixed minor error. I'm still fresh in the field and don't have any super horrific stories, but I interned with a police department while working towards my master's. I went to a scene with a deceased adult male. Suspected overdose and very recent, he was dead for around 8 hours, Nothing gruesome, but his parents found him. They were crying in the next room as an officer spoke with them. At some point we went into the deceased's bedroom, which he shared with his toddler, and I distinctly remember seeing all the toys on the floor and how they were the same ones my little cousins had. I started getting a bit emotional, but then we found bags of powder hidden in the child's clothing drawer. At the university, I took a medical legal investigation course that was taught by a medical examiner. Lots of case photos, but the one I remember was of a suicide bomber. The explosives he had wrapped around himself exploded downwards. Everything below the waist was either gone or a tangled mess, but his top half looked completely untouched. I also did a mock reconstruction report for the 1970 McDonald murders. I had access to scene and autopsy photos, including those of the children. These were almost 50-year-old pictures, so the quality was not the greatest, but I don't think I'll forget them for a long time. It was my first full year on the streets and morning roll call just broke and I got into my patrol car and started to get myself situated for the day when a call comes over the radio for a person with a weapon, which is a fairly common call in my area of patrol, so you never really know what you're gonna get. So I get to the address that radio gave me and get out of my car and start going towards the property where the call came from when another patrol car shows up and meets me at the door, but it's locked. So we start knocking very loud and hear a young woman crying and screaming, and she eventually opens the door and shouts upstairs 3rd floor. And points up the stairs. So we don't have any information whether it's a gun/knife/bat or anything, so we draw our firearms and start up the stairs. I was the first inside the 3rd floor and all the lights were out and it was still dark outside, so I draw my flashlight and start making my way around bends and turns of that floor when I see some lady sitting in the couch, and I say, "Ma'am, where is he at?" As I cross in front of her with my flashlight and clearing the rest of the room when the cop behind me put his light on the lady and sees she has a 12 knife in the center of her chest. Turns out the woman was smoking PCP the night before and stabbed herself in the chest. What's weird about it was that she was sitting upright with her eyes open and her head straight. Then we looked at the floor and it was covered in blood. So after stabbing herself square in the chest, she walked around a little bit before sitting down on the couch and passing away. Stay away from drugs. Grandmother prostituting her deaf grandson. QRT squad went in hard, but at minimum close to 3 dozen unique samples of individuals were found in just the kid's room. I was in narcotics at the time, following up on some shit that lead to this. This lead me to decide I could no longer police, as I would have ended up killing someone at some point. Which, if it weren't for my own kid in my life, I'm not sure anything would have pulled me away. 8 months overseas guarding food trucks and watching supply lines got me hooked in with a supply chain company back stateside. Every once in a while someone who finds out I was a cop says, "Oh, I can see that. No time can put that me away. No time can solve the possibility that my wires would have burnt and I would have been a bad guy too." Edit. Response team went in fast due to possibility of men in house. Ravaged probably quite a bit of evidence. How these people meet and find each other I will never understand. Not crime scene investigator, but in uni I did crime and investigation, and part of it was reviewing old cases. We were lucky enough to have a talk from the lead investigator on the Myra Hindley and Ian Brady case. During the talk we got to review the official crime scene photos, including ones that, as far as I'm aware, the press nor family had ever seen. On the way in we had anything that we could use to take a photo taken off us to prevent any being leaked online. One was a photo of a half skeleton and half human, as the soil had fully preserved one side of the body. Even though it was just pictures, they are images I wish I'd never have seen, along with some of the sick stories you had about what people had done. It made me never do anything with my degree. My uncle was a homicide detective. The case that made him quit the job he was made for was a brutal murder of an infant. There was a large family and friend gathering in a remote town. Lots of alcohol and methamphetamine going about. Ambulance was called the morning after for a baby that's not waking up. Please don't read further if kid stuff fucks you up. Paramedics and police turn up to the corpse of an infant that had been brutally raped and tortured to the point that their body was torn up and their guts were spilling out. The baby had been tortured, murdered and then thrown on the roof of the house. As it was 40+ degrees in the summer and hit the high temps soon after sunrise, the body was pretty much slowly cooking on a hot tin roof. I know one of the paramedics later suicided and 2 other officers moved departments. It has been the only story of suffering I've heard that has made me throw up immediately. Edit, spelling. It may seem like plagiarism or repost, but I had already answered a similar question. Since English is not my first language and I am working, I felt it was easier just to copy my previous post. Sorry for any inconvenience. I worked in Chi in Mexico. Once we went to a safe house where the police found 14 people who were tortured and executed. You could smell the iron from the entrance. Upon entering, there were 2 women with broomsticks taped to the anus and the vagina. In the upstairs bathroom they found a woman tied to the toilet, died of dehydration, had urinated and defecated on her for days. It was evident that they also raped her and beat her before turning her into a toilet. One of the rooms had 5 shackles on the wall and in the center a metal bucket with water. The 5 people died of hunger and from beatings. The sickest was in the backyard. In a warehouse without windows there were several bodies that had their faces and hands removed. It was like watching a horror movie, but that's the narco in these places. Excuse my bad English.